Evaluation Committee. So thank you all for being here or continuing to be here. This is our quarterly meeting of the Data and Evaluation Committee, which is part of the group of committees that moves forward the work of Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan, which is our state 5-year strategic plan. Today, we are going to break the meeting up into 3 or 4 sections. We'll hear about the most recent Head Start and Early Head Start needs assessment, which I have had the pleasure to read and I'm really excited. And then we'll have a short discussion about that. We wanted to start a brainstorm about a data collection repository, and then a short section on updates. And last is this evaluation, data and evaluation related policy recommendation from the Early Childhood State Advisory Council. So we have sort of a general broad recommendation around, I'm just finding the language, responding to inequities in data collection and reporting in order to better represent the experiences of people of color, children with disabilities, and marginalized communities in Vermont. We have that broad recommendation, but what is really actionable, meaningful, and feasible, and what can you commit to prioritizing and executing? So that's a lot for an agenda. And because many of us were just together in a meeting about increasing access to higher education data, I am going to ask that we introduce ourselves in the chat. So just name, organization. If you have the prompt had been to talk about what you or your organization are doing around that recommendation. If you have something to put in the chat, that would be great as sort of a starting point for the later discussion. And let's just take a minute to do that. And then we'll get started with Renee. Morgan, am I missing anything?
No, excited to have you all here.
Okay, and it looks like folks are just putting in their name and organization, which is totally fine. So I'm going to pass it over to Renee for a presentation on this needs assessment that just came out or was just submitted.
Yeah, just submitted. I don't have any goodies or links for folks to go and take a look at this document yet, but I'm hoping it will get approval and will be posted within the next month, hopefully. Okay, so even though I know a majority of folks on the call, I will just say being asked to give more of a, I could talk to you all day. Being asked to give a formal presentation is just evoking some anxiety within me right now. So I just want to acknowledge that. I also realize that my time on the agenda is very brief. And so I know I talk fast. I can't believe I'm going to say I'm going to try to talk faster to get through things. But I am also working with one monitor today. So when I'm presenting, I won't have the ability to see any of you or read the chat. So if someone would be willing to, Dora, if you want to flag anything that comes up with the, in the chat, or no one use the raise hand function, just come off mute and interrupt me. And then Dora, I will also look to you to keep me on time or to give me the hook when I need the hook.
Absolutely. And just to say, you do have a few more minutes since we moved to introductions in the chat. So please don't speak any faster.
Okay. All right. Now I just have to find, because I have too many screens open. All right. Are folks able to see this? Great. Oh, and I can see a few of you. So yes, on the side there. So I saw, thank you, Katie, for that thumbs up. All right, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Renee Kelly. I currently serve as the director of the Vermont Head Start Collaboration Office, which sits within the Child Development Division here at AHS. I have been in this position now since 2018, and I am here today to talk to you a little bit about the Collab Office needs assessment, the most recent needs assessment, that process, our findings, and how those findings have worked themselves into the next 5-year strategic plan of the Collab Office, because everyone has a strategic plan. Hopefully we're all aligned. I will send these slides out, Dora, to you after, so you can at least send these slides out to folks. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these initial slides. These are really for folks who don't have any idea about a collaboration office, or this is your first time hearing anything about a Collab office. There's some background information here in these slides, basically authorized by the Head Start Act. And really my purpose is to facilitate collaboration. I describe it as building a bridge between the federal to local Head Start program and the state funded system. So as opposed to having two different systems going two different ways, Collab directors really serve in a role to be a bridge and ensure that the way the system is growing is aligned. We do a whole lot of things. The slide talks about all those things. The methods really that collabs have to coordinate are really around communication, access, and systems. So a lot of my job is sharing information, convening folks to share information, augmenting, Head Start programs' ability to be a partner at the state level. Our Head Start agencies, they're running programs, they're managing staff crises. A lot of them don't have the capacity to come to meetings at the state level. So the Collab office really helps augment their ability to engage. And then just broad systems building. I think it is really important to note that the Collab office has no authority over Head Start programs within the state. So we don't have a monitoring role. Head Start programs aren't required to send us any information. We really exist to support and facilitate, but there's no accountability from them to me. So I always encourage folks, if you're working with a Head Start program or you have questions or concerns, sure, feel free to give me a call. But just a reminder that I don't have sticks. Sometimes I have carrots, but my job is really to just support and partner and bring people together. This, I just got carried away with a really fun visual. All right, here's the meat and potatoes. So Head Start collaboration offices work under a number of priority areas. There are 5 federally articulated priority areas. And then here in Region 1 in New England, I operate under an additional 4 regional priorities. My structure of the needs assessment process and my strategic plan are broken down into these priority areas. So focusing on early Head Start, which serves prenatal moms to kids age 3, and particularly looking at partnership programs. So these aren't Head Start recipients, but they're partnering with Head Start really to help improve quality across the system. We've got a priority around data, workforce, interactions with QRIS, transitions, even though the current national priority reads about continuity and kindergarten entrance assessment, this is really taken nowadays to mean transitions. And then within regional priorities, we're looking at some particular populations, so services to children experiencing homelessness, children with disabilities, ensuring access to timely healthcare services and general health, oral health, mental health, and lastly, but certainly not least, parent and family engagement. So Collab offices under the Head Start Act are required to conduct or annually update an assessment. So I know previously my predecessor had been actually surveying programs annually. And if you look down the slide, you'll see that this is an 136 question survey. So when I came in, I was like, whoa, that seems like a lot. So now instead of surveying Vermont Head Start programs annually, I only survey them once within the project period, and that's usually in year 5 to help prepare me for my next 5-year period. So that's why I'm able to be here today and presenting information about the most recent needs assessment. That survey was done in spring of 22, which seems a long time ago at this point, but so that survey, and then really my conversations with Head Start programs with other state partners, that's kind of, I take all of that information and synthesize it and then put out what should be my next 5-year strategic plan. The survey itself, in addition to being 136 questions, there's some closed-ended questions, open-ended responses, but really what I'm looking at is the extent of involvement, the degree of difficulty, and the overall level of satisfaction that Head Start recipients perceive in their interactions. In terms of my strategic plan structure, Office of Head Start really hammers down on this. It's divided up into my long-range goals, which are really what those broad and aspirational. Process goals are really what are the little pieces that I need to do to achieve those, and then my short-term objectives. Within this presentation, I did not list out all of my short-term objectives. That seemed like a lot. So what you'll see is some high-level summary of long-range goals and process goals. And I would be happy to answer questions about specifics, or folks can follow up with me at another time if that's helpful. So the first priority area 1 around early Head Start and childcare partnerships. I will say, looking backwards, I inherited the most recent strategic plan. A lot of that last 5-year strategic plan, I didn't really think that the first priority area was articulated. There wasn't a whole lot specifically about early Head Start and thinking about infants and toddlers. A lot of the work centered around partnering with state childcare systems. So this big list you have on your screen, these are all the different partners that Head Start recipients were asked to talk about their relationships, how they work together, the degree of difficulty, their satisfaction, all of those components. What really emerged out of this section for me to continue working on in the next 5 years is really trying to support Head Start programs and strengthening their relationships around universal pre-K, particularly at the LEA level. And you see the word transition here. So again, nothing is like clean cut, things kind of weave over, but I heard loud and clear from many family service managers within the Head Start programs that transition planning was difficult. COVID only made it more so. But the fact that Head Start recipients are also juggling a number of LEAs within their catchment area and things vary across LEAs, their ask was really, hey, we need some help coordinating with LEAs and we'd really like to focus on transition planning. So I'll show you on the next slide, but that really worked its way into the next 5-year plan to be thinking about how can we offer either a regional or a statewide school readiness summit or a kindergarten transition summit, which is modeled after the Office of Head Start's 100 School Reach initiative, which could be a whole nother presentation itself. But then the other kind of state partnering system that was elevated within the needs assessment survey was with evidence-based home visiting, and really strengthening partnerships with other groups in the state that offer home visiting. I think we've acknowledged that regardless of what entity you work with, if you're a home visitor, you need a common set of skills and competencies and support. So really the hope for the collab office is try to figure out not just for Head Start home visitors, but working with CIS or thinking about Dulce or HEART, those programs, and what is that continuum of home visiting services across the state? How do we strengthen that with all of the best practice and materials we have from Head Start? So within the strategic plan, you can really see that goal 1.1 was around strengthening relationships with evidence-based home services. Process goal 1.2. So I took this and spun it a little bit and tried to get it back to what I felt were the roots, which were early Head Start and focusing on infants and toddlers. This became the area that the collab office could tuck that work into. So there's mention here about promoting the supply of qualified infant toddler staff. Hint, hint, you'll see that under priority 3 under workforce. And the last goal there was just trying to work more closely with CIS, not just around home visiting, but also specialized childcare when we're thinking about really vulnerable populations of infants and toddlers, like those involved in child welfare, experiencing homelessness, et cetera. Priority area 2 is around data. So really the bottom line here for me in the next 5 years is to try to continue working and strengthening relationships between Head Start and the Agency of Ed, particularly around data. So Head Start programs do submit their data, and I don't have Dave Kelly's box up, but Dave, I think you're in the virtual room. Under the Race to the Top grant a few years ago, we wrote in some work to incorporate Head Start as early learning data sets within the state longitudinal data system. So Head Start recipients have been entering data into the SLDS for the last 3 years. This data entry is above and beyond. It's in addition to the federal data entry that they're already doing. So there's been a lot of good collaborative work about trying to figure out a process that feels good for everyone. It doesn't feel burdensome. And yet the carrot has always been the idea of being able to get more longitudinal outcomes on these kids. And Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think after data collection next year, we'll actually have SBAC scores for the first group of Head Start students that were submitted to SLDS. So that kind of longitudinal work is exciting.
That might be a year early, depending on what grade they were in when they were 6 in Head Start, Renee.
Right, so I might have to wait another year.
Maybe, I mean, one of the other goals of the project is to look at sector overlap between Head Start, UPK services, and Part B and C data as well, which that's where we've focused so far. It's always tricky in longitudinal research to get people to wait long enough for the actual results.
Yeah. And I think in the needs assessment findings that was elevated, right? Like we've had these conversations. It's like folks are like, well, we're doing all this extra data entry, but we're not getting anything. And it's like, you gotta wait. Hold on, hold on, be patient. So continuing to support that work. And then, Building Bright Futures will be the place that we can access that data publicly. So now that we're getting in the groove of submissions and getting data back out, there's kind of a next iteration of the work that's partnering with BBF around how do we promote this data, share this data, those types of pieces. And so you'll see that again reflected here in that strategic plan. Really the big goal is that Head Start recipients have the data they need to inform those programmatic decisions. And so there's that work related to SLDS. There's also this kind of general placeholder I put in for building the capacity of Head Start recipients to use linked administrative data. So, again, we're going to talk about survey fatigue and everyone sending out surveys. There's so much data that exists out there already. And Head Start recipients did, they were citing, I asked them, like, what sorts of data do you still need or would you still like more of? And it's demographics and substance use and, right, it's those kinds of things. And we know that that data exists. So being able to make a space for me to do some work with programs around figuring out what do they really want to know, what do they need to know, where might that data live, and how might we just link that data administratively and see if that helps them do what they need to do to make some decisions around program improvement, and then partnering with BBF. Priority area 3 is around workforce. Holy moly, I could spend 2 hours on this one. So the needs assessment report itself includes these sections. So we look at the composition of the Head Start workforce, their qualifications, turnover, wages and benefits. Hopefully folks are familiar that the Collab office sponsored the Wage and Fringe study a few years ago. So we talk a little bit about that. I also track involvement and participation with Teach, overall PD needs from Head Start programs. And then also this year, I added a new section to dive a little bit deeper around coaching and mentoring. Because while it isn't something that we have at a real state systems level, Head Start programs do have coaches and they are utilizing practice-based coaching on site. And so this was an opportunity to get a little more information there about what they're doing and what works well in case we can extrapolate it to the broader system. And I had some charts in that report. So I was like, oh, we're at the data meeting. Everyone likes charts. These aren't super fancy charts, but it breaks up the text.
Renee, before
So
you go into that, does
yeah,
the Head Start coaching overlap with UPK coaching, or are they separate?
they
And
are
did,
separate.
and so the Head Starts may be receiving both forms of coaching if they're both types of program?
Potentially, but Dave, what are you thinking when you talk about UPK coaching?
Well, I guess it's just the requirements that you have somebody that has an early learning endorsement and that they are able to spend so many hours with the sort of private programs a week in terms of, I don't want to call it clinical supervision, but let's call it clinical supervision like, okay? Teaching, mentoring kind of issues, I guess would be another way to put it. So
Right. So I will say before UPK here in Vermont, within Head Start programs, if they had early Head Start childcare partnership programs, they also had partnership staff. So those staff were actually responsible for going out and visiting the private partner and doing that coaching and mentoring. They might not have been calling it that with capital C, capital M, but
Yep.
they always had, again, programs who are receiving those partnership funds have had the staffing capacity to provide coaching and mentoring to other programs. But yeah, in theory, there's nothing that says they couldn't have support in both areas, but
Yep.
they do receive, significant investment from OHS around TNTA that helps support this in their programs. Yep.
Thank you, Renee.
Yeah. So I thought it was really important to just ground folks in the composition of the workforce, at least. Okay, so this survey was done in spring of 22. So this is covering the 21 to 22 academic year. So a little bit out beyond COVID. But this was interesting for me and different from past years because this was the year that infant toddler teachers topped out. And I couldn't help but just like wonder all of these questions like, well, is it because we have these workforce issues and classrooms were closed and things were down, right? So I know in a group of researchers and folks who are data minded, I'm sure your brain is going too, but it was kind of significant to step back and say, okay, at least in this past year, Head Start recipients were actually employing a majority of infant toddler teachers. And that does really weave itself back into the anticipated work of developing the infant toddler credential here in Vermont. And then the other thing I just like to point out too is around home visitors. So while it's not huge, we do have an average around 30 home visitors who are employed by Head Start programs too. Qualifications of the workforce, and I should say all of this data comes from PIR, so the Program Information Report, which is the federally required report through Head Start. I should have started with that. So looking at qualifications, again, this is broken down by teaching staff qualifications, so infant toddler teachers, classroom teachers, and assistant teachers. I know my choice of color scheme was not fantastic. I'm hoping that folks, this is accessible for folks and you can see these slight variations in color. But overall, in terms of classroom teachers, majority have bachelor's degrees. That was a program performance standard within the 2016 revisions under Head Start. So here in Vermont, we're doing relatively well there. And we even see we have a lot of infant toddler teachers who also have a bachelor's degree. So again, we can have a whole nother meeting asking questions and speculating, but my job is to just try to hit you over the head with this afternoon. Turnover, so out of, again, I copied and pasted and I'm realizing now I should have included more information like, the number of folks that this was actually capturing. But in terms of the folks who did leave their position with Head Start in the last year, not super helpful because 86% were other, which could have been there was no exit interview done. So we're not quite sure there, but I thought it was at least worth noting that 10% of the folks who left did indicate that they left for higher compensation. And then wages and benefits. So I mentioned a little bit about the early childhood wage and fringe benefit comparability study that was done in 20 and 21 by School Readiness Consulting. really the purpose of that was to define and classify positions. So we making sure that we're comparing apples to apples, and then collecting some general data to describe and compare benefits and wages within the workforce across settings. There was something I wanted to mention about this. Maybe it's on my next slide. Oh, no, the thing I will say about this, so the Collab office kind of responded to support the requirement that Head Start recipients conduct a wage and benefit comparability study. So in the past, individual Head Start recipients were conducting those studies individually. It was a lot of work. The other thing I heard from them when I came into the position is, well, we've done it as a recipient and we've done it with other VHSA members, but my competition is not another Head Start program in another county. It's really regionally looking at school pay or, you know, CIS or mental health, those types of pieces. So this was a gap for Head Start programs as the state. And so the Collab office stepped in to try to facilitate the study and help them meet their requirements.
So
Renee,
let me just, we have about 10 minutes left. And this is such an in-depth report. And I wonder if we can just skip a little bit and then talk a little bit about some of the strategies and some of the ways that we can align with some of this work. I mean, already I'm thinking about you know, that we oh my goodness, there was something else that I just wrote down. Oh, I just put it the PIR in the existing higher ed data. So like clearly there are some opportunities for collaboration and alignment. So I wonder if we can move to that part.
sure. Yes, let's go. I'll just flash these up really quick.
Awesome.
I will say our website is undergoing renovations or whatever you call it. So I don't have a link to give folks, but this report is also publicly available for folks online. QRIS is another one that we talk about. This not a whole lot of work happening because I saw people were saying, hey, we're hopping off to the STARS meeting. So as STARS continues to evolve, the Collab office will support and really advocate that whatever that revised system looks like, it's accessible and capitalizes on reciprocity and maybe leverages some shared monitoring from OHS and those pieces. Transitions, I think I already talked a little bit about earlier. Where are we? Yep, so doing that summit. Supporting children experiencing homelessness. So this is really a lot of work with McKinney-Vento. Supporting children with disabilities. The centers on the revision of an interagency agreement for supporting children with disabilities. Part C, Part B, all those folks. An area around health. I will just say something that was interesting that elevated here was particularly around increasing involvement with medical providers to coordinate services for kids with disabilities. So again, these aren't really clean-cut sections. They kind of overlap. And I will say that dental providers still is a huge issue, having pediatric dental providers in the state. And then family engagement, really the needs assessment was about the impact of COVID and how that challenged programs' ability to build relationships with families, but they also experienced a number of successes when they were able to pivot to using technology appropriately. So that's it. And I'm going to stop sharing and pull this down so I can see folks. Oh, there goes my video. Wrong one. How about that one?
And apologies if
No, I knew it was going to be tight. I did the thing and then I looked at the agenda and I was like, oh my God, that's the time I have. Like, whew, okay.
So I wonder if there are folks who can see opportunities for collaboration. Renee, do you have, is there a, I'm just wondering about that strategic plan. You know, if there's is there a document with the long-term outcomes or
There is, but I can't send it out
Okay.
until I get approval from OHS. So what I can do is send out copies of the slides
Okay.
and have those there, but I can't release that until I get approval from OHS.
Perfect.
So I have a question. Sorry, I've been off camera. I'm trying to eat lunch because I'm back to back all day. Given the report and the recommendations for how early childhood oversight could be changing, how is that going to figure in, or have you thought about how that might be figuring in a strategic plan or what we're going to be doing? I'm just curious about thoughts.
Is that for me specifically, Kaya?
It can be anybody who may want to weigh in, because it's one of the things I'm thinking, because we're in such flux right now because we don't know what's going to happen when the legislature reconvenes. And the ultimate recommendation is an interesting one. So I think I'll leave it at that and see what other people think.
I mean, I can at least say, and this kind of goes back to the structure of the Head Start Collaboration Office. So the Head Start Act, which authorized collab offices, was also responsible for authorizing the state early childhood councils. So that's why I work in such close proximity with Morgan and Building Bright Futures. So I do recognize the implications the systems analysis had. I guess I feel relatively protected because Head Start collaboration offices, we exist and we don't go away. There are a number of my counterparts that are situated within departments of ed. There's a number situated in the Agency of Human Services. So it's been interesting because of my national perspective, I've had the opportunity to see at least my colleagues where they sit, how it works, what works well, what doesn't. So I feel a little more ready for whatever change happens because I know that other states are doing it successfully, but that's just me in the collab role. So I can say, I don't anticipate that the strategic plan or my work will change regardless of where the collab office sits, because my job ultimately is to elevate the needs of Head Start programs, and those are federal to local. So those aren't going anywhere soon.
Thank you, Renee. And Kaya, just to speak a little bit more broadly, you know, Renee mentioned that Building Bright Futures and Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council is named in both state and federal statute to support the long-term vision and strategy for the early childhood system. So right now, all of the strategic planning efforts happen through this public-private partnership, which is incredible. It's been a really important piece, and we are situated outside of state government. That being said, a lot of our responsibility will be to support any governance transitions and what that needs to look like, and making sure that we're using the state's strategic plans as a guide for how that work, how and what work needs to be prioritized, regardless of what transitions happen. So it's a really important place for us to hold outside of state government, this longer term vision and strategy. And those things are living documents that we have to have adaptable to meet the needs of kids and families. I also can say that a grant just dropped, the preschool development grant just dropped, and Vermont will be applying for that funding, which is really exciting. It's a very large 3-year grant, and the next update to our strategic plan is 2025. So we are in the process of executing and implementing the current 5-year strategic vision alongside Renee, and a part of the opportunity is really to be able to hold that space to say, we understand the priorities, the needs, the gaps, the vision, and the strategy. So regardless of where it sits, this is our collective vision and goal, and how to support the broader administration in making sure that regardless of what transitions happen, that we're holding that space.
Thanks. I figured I should ask, since it's probably the elephant in the room of all the discussions that are going on.
Do we have time for another question, Dora? Or I have a related but slightly different question in terms of just thinking about the data that you collect through your is there a way to collect the same data across non-Head Start childcare providers across the state, or is that already done? And I'm just a little out of the loop, and I apologize. I haven't been doing a lot of work in Vermont over the last year, or 3 months, I should say. Feels like a lot longer. So, because it just seems like that's an opportunity to leverage kind of an existing data collection effort that has been utilized for a long time. That's data that we would love to have on more than just Head Start providers. And I don't know what that looks like in terms of getting it out the door, but.
Renee, I don't know if you want to take a stab at what you know about this area, but Claire, you teed up the next section of the work really nicely. So thank you for that.
Nice.
I mean, I love the concept, Claire, right? Like, hey, this is something that's federally mandated. We have to do it with this population. Wouldn't it be great if we could just expand it and then we have apples to apples? Like, absolutely in support. I think, if I could channel current leadership, it's that we also want to be really mindful of who we're serving, how we're serving, how much money, like there's a little bit of a resistance right now. And again, it is really burdensome, right? 136 questions. So, but I love the concept of like, how might we refine it? I mean, full disclosure, it's just me in my shop doing this work with the background that I have, right? But to have access to a team of researchers, or to say like, let's change these questions this way, let's do like, that would be phenomenal. And if we had the opportunity to kind of revise that survey process to make it fit the needs of both the Head Start Act requirements and make it accessible for other programs, I think that would be really great. But no one else has brought that idea to me, so.
It just seems like a missed opportunity. And of course, I know that the structure might change, but it seems like a missed opportunity because for all of the challenges that might come from having the Head Start Collaboration Office sit within the governing body for childcare, there's a lot of opportunity there potentially. So it seems like it could be a potential missed opportunity, knowing that there's a whole other landscape to keep in mind. And sorry, Morgan, you came off mute.
No, I wanted to be able to really quickly pivot. Kate, I'm going to let you make your comment first though.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to say that one of the things that's great about Head Start, though, is that because they have a federal mandate to gather this data, they also put teams in place and they have an infrastructure that allows for it to be gathered. So when I was doing research in New Jersey and on some of, the implementation of their QRIS a few years ago, the private programs were struggling. They said, I don't have a team. I can't do this. And so recognizing once again that there's a lot that Head Start already has in place that makes, having evidence-based decisions and policies more practical.
Caitlin, I would echo that. In Vermont, in the UPK programs, we have 150 that are connected to the school, and they have a great ability to get that data to the schools about the kids. But the 250 that are private providers, they're not always sure where to go, or even they may deal with multiple supervisory unions, and therefore their data may go in 5 directions. And so because they don't have any staff to actually deal with this, it's probably somebody that's been an administrative assistant for a number of years trying to figure out how the heck to get data to AOE that they know they're supposed to do, but don't have a lot of guidance on. Sorry.
No, it's a really important piece of the discussion, and it's a part of what I was going to use for framing for this next section. So first, Renee, thank you so much. And the second you have access to all of the different reports, we recognize as we've been trying to find data and the different documentation from CDD that there are things that are in transition, but once things are available, we'll make sure those are updated and we have all of those links to be able to send to folks. But I also think it's a really important opportunity for all of you to have space to come and present data priorities to the group. So this was one example, and we're really excited to have a discussion about Head Start data. But as you all are having data projects come to fruition and finalizing reports, I want you to be able to come to this space to be able to say, here's what we know, here's what we found, and here's what we're thinking and how it's informing the work. So thank you for that. This next section of the discussion is maybe incorrectly titled, but we've titled it Data Collection Repository. And it's more to say to this group, we're hearing a collective need. Is this a gap that we want to fill right now, and how? So the framing around the fact that we as a state are collecting a lot of data. People will often use a narrative that we don't have any data, we don't have the data we need. We are collecting a ton of data across a range of different sectors, but we aren't always partnering on how and when we are collecting that data. So what we're hearing consistently is survey fatigue from families, from providers, from educators, from staff about what they're required to report on or, commit to responding to. We're having some duplication of efforts across different sectors in, key areas. There are some major limitations around some of the data and whether or not it's shareable across different entities. So for example, if a childcare is responding to questions from the Child Development Division, is that data accessible to Head Start programs, to the Agency of Education? So, there's some really interesting data that's being collected but can't be shared because of how it's being processed. And, there's opportunities definitely on data sharing agreement sides, but I think the question we wanted to bring to this group is, if we're really thinking about how to align and communicate these data collection efforts to reduce some of the duplication, what's the opportunity and what's the first step? And to us in brainstorming this, it was, let's build a space so that people can actually say, I'm about to start collecting data on X, or I am federally required to do a needs assessment, or here's this project we're thinking of, and centralizing that information. So before we have already initiated surveys and responses and all of these things out to the field, that there's a place where folks can go and identify what's already being done and who the point people are so they can make that connection up front before we see these 4 needs assessments just came out, and now we're trying to do meta-analyses to try and figure out how to understand the true impact. So it's more of a question to this group. Is this a need? And can we, can Building Bright Futures step in and say, okay, we'll build a mechanism to actually give people a place to live see what's happening, what's being prioritized and when. And, we have ideas for what fields people could insert that would allow you to get the right information. But what do you think about this as a need of being able to capture the existing data collection efforts across the early childhood system? Go ahead, Claire.
So I have an answer to that, and I also have an answer to what I thought I was hearing you say a little bit before that. But yes, I think that's hugely important. I mean, data cataloging and understanding where your data are and what format I think is hugely important. But I also feel like what I kind of wanted to channel a little bit as you were talking was kind of like my Dr. Wendy Geller, which is kind of building that culture of data use and within the field. Because I do think that, this idea of survey fatigue and all of this, I think people get fatigued a lot faster when they don't understand why the data is important and where it's going and how it's valuable to their work or to the families and children that they're serving. So I do think that there's kind of this almost like an advocacy piece around why data is important that needs to happen within the field at the same time that you're kind of understanding what's out there so that it doesn't become as much of an issue. And then again, kind of thinking about, are we working smarter, not harder, right? Like, what are the existing ways in which programs are actually collecting data? See chat, Bright Wheels, prime example, like that they are working smarter for what they need to do, but not necessarily recognizing that that actually also could help them work smarter for providing data to CDD or providing data to other entities as well. And then I will stop there because I know I want to leave space for others.
I really appreciate the point around building the culture of data use. It's definitely something that we as a state need to prioritize, and how we are talking about data, how we are engaging folks, how we are filling the gap in actually letting folks know what happened once they submitted data. There's a lot there. So I really appreciate that. Jay.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces on the call today. I apologize for being late. I had trouble accessing the Zoom link and wasn't sent a new link, but I'm here now. And it seems like I joined at just the right time, because I just put a link in the chat to a toolkit I found recently that was about the best practices for centering racial equity in your data integration projects. And it is like 70 pages long. It's so good. I've been reading through it while I was waiting to get a new meeting link. And I'm very excited to be able to share it with you all, because I think it could be a really useful document to help inform some of these efforts. I am the policy and research analyst at the Office of Racial Equity. I use they, them pronouns. I'm formerly got a Master of Public Health from the University of Vermont, and became very interested in data and data from a personal and a professional standpoint through some projects and internships I did with the New Hampshire Office of Health Equity. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I am happy to be a support in terms of providing more resources like the one that I shared. I also have a great resource for equity in data visualization. So yeah, I'm here to listen and learn, but I wanted to say hello, introduce myself for those of you who I have not met, and say hello to the folks that I recognize from the call. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Jay. Incredible, incredible resource. Thank you for sharing. And, you know, I think recognizing the time we allotted for this discussion today, the big question to you all is this something that we should do? Should we build this catalog and this resource for people to dump in? I say dump in, to fill in, here's the data that we are prioritizing and collecting on these topics, or we're about to initiate a needs assessment. Who's already done this, and what questions did you ask? Who are the point people? And if the answer is yes, we want this information centralized, we will stand up that type of a tool and really look to this group in future meetings to help us build that resource out, and then figure out the best way to make sure the right people have access to that information. So it's really, for those of you who were in our previous meeting, what we're really working towards right now is centralizing what we can. How are we centralizing resources and building this common vision and strategy for how to do this work well together? And this can be one tool that we can all use to know what data collection efforts are about to happen, and how are folks thinking about them, as a way to say, wait, red flag, we're already doing these 3 pieces, but not this one. And how do we align that effort? How do we make sure we're not duplicating efforts? And what does that look like? So that's the big question is, do I have a resounding, yes, we need some sort of place to centralize that information? And to Jay's point, what are all of the tools that we should all be using or thinking about using, in addition to not just what data are we trying to collect?
Morgan, I'm definitely a yes on this, but I wanted to also add to your catalog. We should also have a column in there for where current reports outputs.
Yes.
So we can find the data too. Okay.
100%. So for those of you who are just joining and are new to the group, a lot of the way that BBF is working in this data space, in centralizing data resources policy efforts around early childhood, is through Vermont's Early Childhood Data and Policy Center. So we have a space right now dedicated towards publications, reports, and resources. And this is also a place where we will be building this out and really looking to you all to say, what needs to be there? What resources, what tools, what publications, what reports need to be in that type of a repository as well, for people to have a one-stop shop for all things early childhood data related work. So we don't have a ton of time allocated in today's meeting to go into the logistics of, what are those fields? How are we thinking about it? The big question is, do you want us to tackle this? We're willing to. And If you do, then we'll have a series of discussions about what that looks like and how you help us build that space.
And just
Can
to
we-
set expectations, I think that we're talking about like a very basic, like this came about because we sent out a family needs assessment survey and sent back a link that was like, hey, we just sent out a family needs assessment survey to a slightly different population. And we hadn't known about these, and that happens all the time. And so this would be really basic, like, when are you, like, who are you? When are you fielding this survey? What's the general topic? And are you like, so that we know, and ideally this is happening 3 months in advance, so that if there is one question that can be added, and then we can all promote the same survey, great. We're not talking about like necessarily data sharing agreements. We're not saying like, would you be willing to have to share your raw data beyond these two partners? But like, here's the primary contact in case we are able to utilize this data.
Right. It's really about the point of connection. How do we all collectively know, as early childhood researchers and partners in the system, what data is being collected and how, and who are the point people? And it's really important that BBF is holding this space, because we are also the ones that are charged in statute to do a periodic needs assessment. And so to do that well, I want to know what's already being collected so that we are, one, not collecting that same data, or how are we doing that more systematically and across a broader population? Renee and then Jay.
Yeah, two thoughts. One, I would just offer yes, all yes. But it might be important for us to then create a placeholder on our agenda if we're coming together for quarterly meetings, that would be the time to review that document and create some space. So it's not just something that's out there, but we are actively looking at it, and we can be intentionally planning of anything that's coming up. That was one. And then two, I think I forgot, and I see Heather's hand up, so I'll just go back on mute.
Absolutely, Renee. Heather.
I just wanted to put out there that I think that from Vermont AYC's perspective, I definitely think something like this could be beneficial. And it would help us, because we intersect obviously with the field, but with a lot of different partners. So this would definitely help us not only make sure obviously that we're not duplicating things, but to have data at our fingertips to improve services to early educators, because we are a member organization, but really most of our programs are available for all early educators. And it is a good time coincidentally for us, because I mentioned in the other meeting, we're in the process of developing like a centralized CRM to try to improve those services to early educators. And then going to we're thinking about like maybe in the future, if there ever was coaching or mentoring or something like that, if we had that kind of data available, it would help us target those specific areas. And as well with higher ed collaboration, I just see a lot of potential for early ed and higher ed to just strengthen that collaboration and really make sure that people are able to access higher education without going into college debt. That's been a big initiative of ours, and that data would definitely help. And we have a piece of it, but yeah, I think collaboration is always great.
Thank you so much, Heather. I completely agree. And I'm also monitoring the chat, and people are identifying fields and what needs to be there and partners and all of those things. And that is the purpose of this committee. This data and evaluation committee is to help build the space and the mechanism, and to then be disseminating and making sure that we are all using it in the right ways. So I really appreciate that as well. Go ahead, Valerie.
Great, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Valerie Wood. I'm the Research and Evaluation Coordinator at the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion at the University of Vermont. And so, as some of you have put in the chat, that your work intersects with the area of early childhood at the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion. Our work also intersects with that population to the extent that young children who are in need of special education services, might be involved with BBF programs and support. They might be also intersecting with efforts at our center to promote quality of life for all individuals, including disability. And so I just wanted to mention that CDCI, that's the acronym for our center, is also undergoing a needs assessment right now as we prepare to write our next 5-year plan. So if any of you heard from Jesse Suter in the earlier meeting, he may have shared that. So I think this would be great just to see where there's kind of some overlapping efforts amongst our different organizations to collect the data that tells the story of the populations that we're seeking to serve. And I also wanted to highlight what was said earlier about moving away from this idea of data sharing agreements and sharing raw data. In the past, when I've intersected with the state, I was a part of some effort to negotiate dating sharing agreements with state of Vermont agencies, particularly DCF Family Services. And it's really difficult. There's a lot of legal protections that the state asks us to put in place if we're accessing raw data from the state. And as a citizen, I'm appreciative of that. It also makes it really hard as a researcher if you're trying to gain access to that data to help the state tell the story of the work they're doing. So I think starting with this idea of what's the data that's already been collected, who would you contact to learn more about it, and really thinking more about the deliverables that are already being produced from raw data. So what kind of data briefs, infographics, summaries are already out there. A lot of us are probably doing some kind of quarterly or annual report to stakeholder groups. So that's the kind of information that I, in my mind, I envisioned when I think it was Dora made that statement. And I think that would be really exciting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Valerie. And I know that a lot of you were here in the previous meeting, and I'm happy to, at another meeting with this committee, talk a little bit more about this bigger vision for the Interdisciplinary Early Childhood Research Consortium and the way that work will be happening and what that means. That includes both state government role, but also the team's role in what that will look like. And a part of that really hinges on not just the conversation we're having around what data folks are planning to collect, which is really what we're talking about in this repository, but what are our broader needs as an early childhood system for data? Who has it? Who holds it? Who has decision-making authority on it? Is it accessible to the public or not? And what does that mean? And where is there a need to build capacity in state government to collect additional data based on the gaps? So that's definitely a part of the conversation. And this is a little bit smaller of a scale to say, how do we not all send out 18 surveys to families and early childhood educators across a 3-month period that none of us can actually access each other's responses except for the report that comes out 4 months later, right? It's that piece. How are we actually understanding who's collecting what and when, and where there are opportunities to align? Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you very much. And I will keep this comment short because I think it might not be 100% focused on what we're talking about today, but I wanted to comment briefly on kind of the concept of like survey fatigue. And I really loved Dr. Claire Waterman's comment about like that people get fatigued faster when they don't understand what it's being used for, because a really important concept for data equity is to actually not only collect the data, but then also report back to the communities and say, this is why your data is beneficial to us for our planning purposes. This is how we're going to help you with it. And like really like complete the circle of like not only extracting data from people, but also returning like not just a report, but like, this is how we are going to help you with the data that you've provided us. So I'm really interested in that, and I would love to be a part of any kind of conversations around like how can we make sure that community members who are providing us data don't feel like they're part of an extractive process, which is a great phrase that I learned from Susanna Davis, my supervisor, executive director of racial equity, because like when she said like we don't want this process to be extractive for the first time, I was like, yes, that is exactly how I would describe some of these kind of, things. That concept, that phrase extractive was like, oh yes, the best words.
Yeah. Oh, Jay, I really appreciate you bringing that term to this group, because a lot of what we hear from the system and partners on the ground is data gets submitted and it goes into a black box and people don't know what happens with it. How is it used? Is it meaningful? And then we're not operating in continuous quality improvement. We're not using that data to inform programmatic decision making and what that means. So I think it's a really big opportunity, and I really appreciate that. For the sake of time, I do want to transition us. And what I want to do for the sake of time is prompt you to be thinking about the last section while other people are giving updates. So the last section of today's discussion is really critical. We, on an annual basis, for those who aren't a part of this process, typically the State Advisory Council endorses recommendations that are then presented to the legislature, the administration, and partners across our network are really tasked with moving those recommendations forward. The Data and Evaluation Committee is a really important committee in thinking about our data needs in the system. And so what we've heard over the past year is that we need to prioritize equity in data collection. But we want you to help us define what that actually means and what's actionable. So we have a broad bucket for State Advisory Council recommendation, and I'll have Dora post this in the chat. It currently states, respond to inequities in data collection and reporting in order to better represent the experiences of people of color, children with disabilities, and marginalized communities in Vermont. Very broad statement that is not yet actionable, as meaningful as it needs to be. So the question that I want you to be thinking about when it's not your turn to speak in updates is, how do we create a recommendation or a series of recommendations under that statement that is actionable, that's meaningful, that's feasible to tackle in the next year, and that we as a group are essentially saying that we are committed to moving forward as this public-private partnership. So again, the State Advisory Council doesn't have authority to tell the governor, and now you will do this thing. But it is us putting forward this collective commitment to what we want to prioritize as we're thinking about equity in data collection. So I want you to be thinking about that over the course of the next 15, 20 minutes. Because that's sorry, Dora, less than that.
Like 10 max.
The next 10 minutes. Okay. So we're going to take 10 minutes for everyone to be able to give updates on data projects, priorities, and things that are coming up for you. And then we're going to have that discussion about the recommendation. So do you want to open the floor for data related updates, needs? Go ahead, Claire.
Okay, so I'm sorry, because I realize I keep going first, but I did want to make sure that everyone was aware of yesterday, my team released our annual, we used to call them our state fact sheets. We're rebranding them to our landscape analysis. So I wanted to flag just something and not just put it in the chat, but I do want to flag that when you look at the Vermont data, you're going to go, and part of this gets back to who do we go to for data. So we generally work with our membership and with childcare resource and referral agencies to collect information and data on the supply and quality of programs within the state. We are working to update our survey so that the language is better, because I instantaneously flagged that in Vermont, licensed family childcare providers or group homes and registered family childcare providers are basically what we're intending by licensed family childcare providers. So you will see that there's like no family childcare providers on the fact sheet for Vermont. So I just want to flag that so that if you're looking at it, but I think this gets back to the conversation around who holds the data and where do we reach out. We have not gotten responses from Vermont over the last couple of years when we have reached out to folks to get the survey responded to. So we've, so prior to me joining, my colleagues were going and finding that data through the market rate survey and other things. And so they don't have that information. So I'm gonna stop because we only have a little bit of time, but please do check that out and we will work on our systems for collecting more accurate data in the future though. I just wanna flag that for Vermont in particular.
Thank you, Dr. Waterman. I also want to flag before we go to Dr. Northey that Dr. Wood mentioned that CDCI is doing their needs assessment. And so if you are tackling or your teams are actively looking at data related to how we are supporting kids with disabilities or individuals with disabilities and special health care needs, to reach out to her as well. Go ahead, Dr. Northey.
I just wanted to share that I have finished collecting data for my study on people in our early childhood preparation programs. And so there was a survey, I had 94 respondents, and then I interviewed 20. And I'm analyzing the data, and the report will be out in December-ish, late November, December. So I'm excited to talk more about that in different groups. So you'll probably be hearing about it.
Thank you. Dave.
Sorry. Yeah, so as Renee mentioned, we do a study in collaboration with the Head Starts. Tomorrow, hopefully, I'll be finishing up the error reports that I have on those. And so that data then will be done in terms of the collection for the year. We will have an output that we give to Building Bright Futures. We haven't got, we're able to produce a lot of output that we haven't found a place for yet for that study. And that is one thing that we're searching for. We're looking for, trying to sort of work through and possibly also make time resources for. There's also a list of things that I generally give to BBF that I was looking at yesterday for Dora, which is like enrollment for UPK, number of suspensions and expulsions for children under 8. Basically, November through December becomes a super busy time for AOE in terms of data, because we are disseminating and reporting on the end of year collection from 2022 at that point. So all of those sort of products and reports are going to be coming. Some of them end up in Morgan's area or organization, and some of them end up on the AOE website either in our Vermont education dashboards or the annual snapshot measures that are used for school accountability.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep. Oh, and the report that Keely mentioned is super interesting to me. And I just hope that part of the, and I think it is based on what you're saying, Morgan, that we'll all know when like Keely's reports come out and my reports come out and Aaron's reports come out, so that like,
yes,
we can just read them. Yeah.
Yes, the hope is that we are centralizing a space where we have a mechanism to know when people are collecting data, and that everybody is sending us the, hey, this was just released, can you blast it to the network type of thing. Yes. Anne.
I just wanted to share some things that regularly happen at CIS just really quickly. Every 6 months, we have a semi-annual report that regions submit to the state. And the timing of when that a summary or even a regional report gets back, as we were just talking about, to the people that submitted the data, I'm still learning about. But I wanted to share that a focus the state team is pursuing and using that data with regions is early childhood and family mental health, and looking at how that specific data from that service area is collected and reported and what it means for the region. And then just to point out something you may probably familiar with from BBS data brief, that the data from the CISEI Early Intervention Family Survey for this year is currently under analysis, including the family comments. And I know that's going to be shared at the Vermont Interagency Coordinating Council meeting next week, and in a couple other venues. I don't know if an official report is coming out, so sorry I'm missing some information.
Thank you, Anne. Katie, and then if there are others that we didn't get to, please put them in the chat. And you can also connect with Dora and I if there are other things that need to be disseminated. Go ahead, Katie.
Thanks, Morgan. Yes, so at Let's Go Kids, we're in the midst of our policy agenda development, and we're kind of focusing on a couple key areas. We're focusing on family affordability, making sure no family pays more than 10% of their income, workforce, increasing workforce compensation, and building up that pipeline of teachers and making sure it's ready to that there's increased capacity. So those capacity building efforts in the workforce, increasing workforce capability, that's what we're working on there. We're working on specialized childcare, and we're also monitoring the studies that were issued in H171, the financing study and the governance study. We've been monitoring those efforts there as well. In this policy development work, we've been doing outreach to community partners, and we've got 2 surveys out in the field right now. One is for families of color. We've been partnering with our partners to reach out to families to get their input to understand their needs in the childcare system. And we've also been working with the Vermont Family Network on taking an input from families with specialized childcare needs. So we've got those 2 surveys out, and we're hoping that that input from those surveys can inform the work. And one other effort we're working on is we have a Vermont Family Advisory Committee for families of color and take in qualitative input from families to better understand the needs there as well.
Thank you so much, Katie. So there's a lot of data efforts happening. People are collecting data. They are moving data. We are producing it. Very clearly hearing a need to centralize all of this. So we'll be reaching back out on that front. Dora just put in some of the big data efforts that BBF is tackling. And I'm not going to take time to talk about those right now, even though I'm really excited about them, because what I really want to take the last few minutes to talk about, and it's not enough time, I recognize, is recommendations around what the State Advisory Council should be supporting and endorsing around equity and data collection. So again, the statement that I just posted in the chat bar is the current language. So the question to this group is, that's a very big, broad statement. What are you all thinking about in terms of making this actionable, meaningful, feasible? What are we willing to commit to as a state to really be thinking about equity and data collection? Go ahead, Erin.
Just so Claire doesn't have to go first again. I was, and maybe this isn't exactly what you want in your recommendation, but it really struck me the conversation that we've had today about if we're collecting information from certain groups of people, or particularly with an eye towards equity, that the real lack isn't that we don't have data about them, it's that we're not putting the data back out there. And that I think that the obligation and like the recommendation that should go out is to be really intentional in putting relevant and useful information about, particularly about these sort of subpopulations and marginalized communities that we're asking them to do something for us, and maybe we're not even using the information. We're just like putting it in a file somewhere. And anyway, so I could go on and on about that.
Thank you.
My recommendation.
Thank you, Erin. And again, I want people to really use this as a brainstorming session where you are putting things out there for the group to reflect on and think about. Kaya.
So I have I always have a bunch to say about this, Morgan. So number one, we need to start compensating people. We're asking for them to share their expertise, and we expect people to do it for free. And that's just no longer okay. Second of all, yes, we need to stop throwing the data on the pile, and because of structurally racist and colonized views of what data is and how it's collected. We really spend a lot of time, honestly, explaining why we can't talk about these groups and actually talking about them. And it's frustrating. Yes, I'm a professional. I also had 3 multiracial children in Vermont. And the experiences that we had and the things that they saw before we left, in some ways were really horrific. And nowhere is that really collected in a way that is meaningful. And I'm tired of hearing people call qualitative data stories. Qualitative data is data. And if it's analyzed and designed correctly, it is just as valid as any quantitative method. And we need to start saying that, because, as a qualitative researcher with 20 years of experience, I'm really tired of it. And as someone in a marginalized population, I'm really tired of not being counted. If 11% of our census population are young people and under, that's enough to count them in some way. So that's what I'm going to say. I think I want a commitment from people to saying we're not going to just collect this data, that we're going to decolonize, and that we're going to compensate. Even if it's simply as putting people into drop, we need to show people that we value their time.
Thank you so much, Kaya. Renee. No one's seeing that I'm almost crying and excited about all of this, and that this is so exciting because this is the work I want to be doing and prioritizing as a state. But go ahead, Renee.
Yeah, I mean, this is gonna just seem totally nothing for his comments, but my nuts and bolts kind of a brain, I guess to your question around this
Renee.
What's that?
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. Do not apologize. Women apologize too often for what they have. So you're not allowed to.
All right. I appreciate that. I'm not sorry, Kaya. My analytical brain is going to this place of, right, these recommendations are to the governor, to the legislature, right? As a state, this is what we recommend. They also get a little bit tricky because as I'm sorting out in my brain, what's the work of BBF as an entity and an organization? What's the role of BBF in terms of collective impact and supporting other entities and organizations and being able to do this work? So I feel like I'm really fluid in my brain right now about this recommendation and where we're putting the onus. But honestly, I love, was it Jay that dropped that link in the chat around centering right data? And I have seen that before, but it's one of those things like you see it and you're like, oh, great, I'll file it for later. Now is the right time to look at it. And I wonder if there's opportunity for BBF to be supporting and facilitating, whether it's through regional councils or in other more responsive ways to help organizations work through that toolkit. I mean, it's a roadmap. We don't have to invent anything. It's about, are you asking these questions? Are you doing this work? So for me, in my mind, and we've had this conversation, I would love to see BBF through its regional councils be able to support this work. And I think in doing that, it's also going to be elevating the importance of data, right? And that data literacy piece. So I think it's a both and, but I'm also mindful of the capacity of BBF and how you're able to do it. But that's how I see it. If you want something that's concrete and actionable, it's going to take work in communities with entities and organizations to do this. We can't go big. We have to kind of focus. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you. And I guess that's important framing for this entire committee to recognize that in the past, the recommendations from the State Advisory Council that have been endorsed on behalf of this entire network have included recommendations for how BBF improves our work and what we prioritize. We've stepped back from that in terms of SAC recs and instead are inviting you to say, here are areas that you need to prioritize and how we think about doing that work, again, within regions, within committees, and the State Advisory Council. And what we're asking for this year is how can we as a state, whether it's asking for legislative action or asking the administration to prioritize X, Y, and Z, what are those tangible efforts? And some of the things that I heard Kaya say around compensation for surveys and compensation for time in interviewing and all of those things are absolutely areas that we can put additional kind of concerted efforts around as a state. Prioritizing qualitative data the same way that we prioritize and understand and use quantitative data to inform decision making is another that I very clearly heard come through. So those are the areas that I want us to be thinking about in terms of SAC recs. And separately, always inviting, hey, BBF, have you thought of this? And here are some opportunities. Valerie, Dr. Wood, I apologize.
No, that's fine. Valerie's fine. I am thinking about the problem statement. The problem statement is that we have inequities in data collection when we compare across different groups. So white people compared to BIPOC people, able-bodied to disabled individuals. So, I think about what are the root causes. And one of the things that we're trying to do at CDCI more often is before we even launch a data collection effort, whether that's a survey or a focus group effort, going to the community members that identify as part of that community and saying, are we even asking the right questions? Are these the questions you care about? Because I think a lot of times when I see surveys have a low response rate, there's lots of different drivers. And, somebody mentioned survey fatigue, constantly bombarded with like, hey, compared to this survey, that survey. So, but just to back it up a step and make sure that we are connecting with those community members to say, these are the things that we think are important from an academic point of view or a policy point of view, but what's important to you? And then, making sure that feeds into building that pipeline of when we collect the information, that's the information that's of value to that community.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, Valerie. Dave.
Yeah, so Anne put a really interesting statement, and I was going to comment on this before, but talking about collecting demographic information that allows people to self-report about their identities, right? We have some problems with that, not just in Vermont, nationwide. And a good use case, we've talked a little bit about race. Another one is on gender. Currently, Vermont is collecting most of its data as male and female. The non-binary and other options that NIH is recommending are great, but for like an agency to be able to collect those options, we need them to be reportable through our federal reporting requirements, right? So like EdFacts has to accept that X equals non-binary. If they don't, I can't collect it that way. So that's sort of, I guess it's a limitation around being able to do what Anne is suggesting, but it probably isn't a limitation in the fact that we can't do it. It means that there's extra work for us to getting those options out there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave and Anne, and for all of you to be willing to say, we know there are limitations based on federal requirements and reporting, and how are we collectively figuring out what the strategies are to get around those barriers, because this is what we should be prioritizing and how. Heather.
Unmute. Yeah, really quick, I just wanted to say I 100% agree with the need for compensation around the survey results. I think that would really be helpful. And then I just wanted to put a plug in for the need for data around equity and diversity for our workforce, because we know that we've got like anecdotally, we know we've got a representation issue. And then, so just having data so that we could do a better job and really dig into that and make a substantial difference would be very helpful for us. And then making data available for programs on just resources to support equity and diversity within programs. I think we could do a better job of making some data and some resources available to programs. So I know that's not an exact answer, but I just wanted to put in a quick plug for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. So I know that is not enough time for us to then reflect back to you in one beautiful line with 4 bullets of exactly what these recommendations could look like. But that's a good starting point for us to be able to say, okay, here's how we should be thinking about this series of recommendations. And to be able to put something in front of this group in the next couple of weeks to summarize, and really wanting to say to all of you, what else and what's possible in a year? Because State Advisory Council recommendations are really saying, we understand there's a need and there's a gap, and here's how we as a state asking every single partner in the system to commit to moving this thing forward. So my question to you all around equity is, it's huge and there's so many different factors and components. And what do we want to commit to as a collective body to say, here's what we can do in terms of the administration being able to move something forward. Here's what the legislature could or could not do to move things forward. And then how we at Building Bright Futures and partners in this public-private partnership need to be moving things forward. All of those things are important. And what lands in SAC Rex is, here's what we're committing to, and here's what we are collectively asking people to commit to. Any other thoughts to wrap up today's meeting around the discussion of equity? Go ahead,
So
Laura.
this is slightly an update and slightly around the equity piece, but as a network across the Building Bright Futures, all of our regional councils, state advisory council, VCAP committees, we are doing a point in time count of folks primarily along demographic, primarily to collect demographic information. We have a stakeholder survey, but it doesn't capture the entire network. We have a lot of thoughts about who we're missing, but also don't want to make any assumptions about how people identify. And so I will be sending out a quick survey of asking for how you identify with regard to demographic characteristics. And I will be sending that out in October because we want to make sure that it is consistent across all of the committees and across the network. And we'll be using that information to guide our work to make sure to do a better job of bringing folks to the table whose voices are not represented.
So we are coming up on 2:30, and I just want to say a huge thank you to those of you who started with us around noon. Was that when we started our original meeting? I am really excited about all of the progress, even in the last couple of hours we've made in being able to say, here's what we care about, here's what needs to happen. And as a group to be able to say, here's some steps we can take to move it forward. So thank you for all of that time for spending with us. We are really committed to holding this space and making it truly a meaningful space where partners can come together and do work that will make an impact on kids and families across the state. So thank you. Thank you. Dora and I will be doing some work in the background to help start to shape a recommendation in this area, and then really putting it back out to this group to say, what did we miss? What's the language, and how do we really be thoughtful about it? So thank you all for your time today. Our next formal meeting isn't until December, so we'll make sure you're all on that invitation, but please be ready to hear from us in the next couple of weeks and then over the course of the next couple of months. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.